Got the coffee in hand, ready. I don't know if you know, and obviously if you're working from home at the moment, but Pret are doing like an unlimited subscription to coffee. So the first month's free as well.
Oh, right, okay.
So I've just been having about 3 coffees a day just to make use of it.
Just nailing the coffee.
Yeah, you can get like smoothies and other things as well. It's I read into it to thought must be a catch here, but yeah, it's just to increase kind of like footfall in like city centre areas. So yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Brilliant. I don't think I could handle that. I'm trying to cut down my coffee intake, to be honest. coffee and tea intake, to be fair.
Yeah, that's it. I've tried just drinking like green tea and things like that, but it just doesn't give you the same result, does it, half the time? And just stay awake.
I think that's the point, though, isn't it? Really,
Yeah,
to be fair.
that's it.
All that caffeine can't be good for you.
No, definitely. But yeah, no, obviously, thanks for taking your time today. Obviously, first installment of our serverless trusted tech talk, or the kind of podcast series that we're running.
Yep.
So we obviously be delving into more like the introduction of serverless today. Kind of those who are not necessarily using serverless at the moment, or people that are maybe looking to adapt that into the company going forward, or even those that are just really keen on finding out a bit more. So yeah, I mean, obviously we're doing this over the next couple of weeks in terms of different experts across the Northwest, and then we'll be kind of rounding up with a webinar towards the end as well. So yeah, I guess I'll start off, I'll introduce myself. For those who don't already know out there, I'm Lloyd from Maxwell Bond. I'm a recruitment consultant who covers the infrastructure and the DevOps market across the Northwest. I'm one of the co-organisers of the Trusted Tech Talks as well. Do you want to introduce yourself, John?
Yes, certainly. So firstly, thanks for having us on today, Lloyd.
Yeah, no worries.
So yeah, my name is John Vines. I'm an engineering lead at AO.com. I've been with AO for over 3 years now. Predominantly my role at the moment is part of our data team building out a data platform, particularly moving into event-driven architectures and streaming architectures, and Serverless has a part to play in that. Certainly some of the use cases we've looked at over the last 3 years have involved quite a bit of adoption of serverless practices and principles. So looking forward to the chat today.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, obviously questions today really are going to be kind of focused around the introduction of serverless. Obviously, for those who don't know and who've not been using it. So I guess very, very open question here, John, but what is serverless computing in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a broad term. It's serverless, and it can apply to quite a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think that the first thing to start with is to say what it's not, and I guess we're not here to say that servers don't exist. Servers are still absolutely a part of the stack, but I think the main thing that happens is that we've effectively abstracted away our need to operate and have to manage those servers. So a good way to think about it is that kind of serverless is the same way that Wi-Fi is to wireless. So if you send a text on your phone, as an example, at some point it's going to hit a wire. That's just the nature of it. You just don't have any kind of connections to that wire, as it was. So with serverless, it's similar. We don't have to reserve anything. We just write the part that responds to some request and let the vendor, whoever we've chosen to manage those services that we're using, to worry about everything else. I think just taking it a little bit further, a lot of people, when they think about serverless, tend to think about functions as a service as the main use of what serverless is. So that is typically where a developer will write backend code and they'll deploy that code, but they don't manage the servers or the long-lived server applications that code runs on. That's what's been kind of deferred to the operator. Obviously, Lambdas, AWS Lambdas are a really well-known option of that. There are obviously others: Google Cloud Functions, Azure Functions, IBM Functions. There are open source versions such as OpenWhisk, which you can run on top of Kubernetes. But the functions as a service is just a small part of serverless, really. It's actually another huge part is the managed services that go alongside it. So just as an example, we can think of storage services. If we're being AWS specific, that's things like S3, DynamoDB, messaging services such as SNS and SQS, API proxies like API Gateway. And most cloud providers have those types of services available as part of their kind of serverless offerings. And then it goes beyond just the cloud vendors as well. There are other managed services out there that operate in a serverless way. So a good example is the Kafka as a service offering that Confluent own and run. You're completely taken away from what a server means in that scenario. And I think broadly that's kind of how I like to think about serverless. It's the stuff that we don't need to worry about. And I think the best definition I've seen is by someone called Paul Johnston, who basically says that serverless is, or being serverless, building in a serverless way is effectively you end up with an architecture that costs you nothing to run if nobody's using it except for your data costs. And I think that's a really good encapsulation of how I like to think about serverless.
Nice. Oh, good. Really good insight there, John. And I guess what would you say is the biggest benefits then of obviously using that? I know you've covered some there where you've delved into quite a lot, but what would you say is the biggest benefit of using it?
Yeah, definitely. I think once we start to understand a little bit more what serverless is and what it brings us, you can start to ask the question why. Like you're asking about the benefits, and that's a big part of the why. And there are a few kind of characteristics that come along with deciding to be serverless or going down that serverless route. The first is that it's scalable by default, so you don't have to worry about setting up things like auto scaling policies, managing load balancers, or worrying about the life cycle of where that compute is being run. All of that's built into the offering of the services that you're using. They tend to be more resilient because things like high availability and fault tolerance again are built in, so we don't have to build those in ourselves to the same degree that we would if we were building a more traditional server-based application that's running either on a server or within a container or something like that. That resilience comes as part of the package. They're inherently more secure. We've passed a lot of the burden of security to the cloud provider as well in this kind of scenario. So they're responsible for the data center, the network, the servers, the operating system. So all things like patching and making sure that your hardware is kept up to date is things that we don't have to worry about as much. And it's not to say that the attack, they just change. We're responsible for the functionality so we're responsible for like the code that's deployed and the security of that, but the security of the hardware that it's deployed to becomes something for the cloud provider to manage. And then finally, they're cheaper. In all honesty, we said before, you pay for usage effectively. So if you've got traffic patterns that result in very little usage overnight, as an example, you only pay for the bits that you actually use. And I think when a function isn't running, you're not paying for anything. Obviously, the caveat to that is that we still have to pay for data storage. If data is a part of your architecture deployment, you've still got to pay for where that's stored.
Nice. There's quite a lot of benefits then for using serverless. So I guess, is there any disadvantages at all for using it? I know some people are not in serverless at the moment, but would there be any that you know of?
Yeah, I think there are. I think there's always trade-off with kind of any technical choice that you make. A couple that spring to mind for me are one that's always touted is that fear of lock-in, being locked into a given cloud provider. I think if you make the choice to go all in with something like serverless, you kind of making the decision that you're going all in on a given cloud provider. In some cases, those fears can be justified. In other cases, I think the advantages outweigh it a little bit, and it should just be part of the wider conversation around what you're comfortable with as an organization or as a team within an organization, with the options that you're given around building whatever it is that you need to build. And another one is so we've already spoke about serverless being cheaper, and in a lot of use cases it is cheaper, but it's not a silver bullet. It's not the right choice for every type of architecture that we're going for. So a good example, there was a couple of articles a while back which was speaking particularly about trying to use serverless in a machine learning environment, and particularly around model training, and it kind of sounds it doesn't really fit that use case, if you know what I mean. What we're talking about for model learning is quite high intensity data crunching. What serverless gives us is for our more everyday type use cases, an ability to get up and running quickly and see if the thing that we're building is the right thing. Whereas machine learning and model training is much longer scale, needs different types of characteristics of an architecture to help us with that as well.
Nice. Okay, great. I guess, well, yourself at the moment, is it just AWS that you're using over at AO for these serverless?
Predominantly, so AWS was our cloud provider as choice. Yeah.
Okay. I guess, in your opinion, what would you say is the best cloud provider to work with serverless? I guess I'm mostly working with AWS yourself at the moment, but do you know a lot about the other cloud providers? Is it fairly similar, or is there other benefits?
Yeah, I guess there is an element of bias in the fact that the majority of what I've built is in AWS. The options that are available in the other cloud providers is not something I've got a huge amount of experience with, but I know that they offer similar things. I think the things I know about AWS, particularly with serverless, kind of the Lambda function itself is the glue for how serverless architectures are built within AWS. And the last time I read this, is probably more now, but I read that they had 47 different triggers for those Lambdas, which is by far the most of any provider. It's kind of baked into their serverless offering as being kind of event first. And that event-based paradigm is kind of deeply baked into how services are orchestrated. So it lends very naturally to that serverless type of architecture that you're building. And it's built with a first principle in mind. And from a couple of conversations I've had, whether that's exactly the same for other cloud providers or not, I'm not too sure. But in the same question, right, if we elevate the discussion out of serverless for a second, each cloud provider has its own advantages. And for what we're building, that kind of compute advantage you get through AWS is the thing that draws us in more than anything else at the moment.
Yeah, I guess it's another discussion. It could go quite in depth with that as well with the other cloud providers. It's always the big topic, isn't it? Which one's the best, and which one's worth using. So yeah, okay, great. So I guess with obviously yourself at AO, how is it used at AO? Obviously, it's, like you've mentioned, there's different areas where it does work best. But yeah, where does it kind of work with you guys?
Yeah, definitely. So I can talk from a couple of angles. I can talk from the stuff that we've worked on as a team, which I'll spend a bit of time on.
Yeah.
And then there's a number of use cases where it's growing in usage across AO. The things that I've worked on where we've approached using serverless. So if I take us back to the first use case, it was a relatively time constrained delivery, but in a true sense rather than an arbitrary deadline, in the sense that we had to get something done by the deadline date for GDPR compliance a couple of years ago. I'm sure a lot of people remember that as quite a fun time of trying to get things ready for GDPR compliancy. And I won't dwell too much on GDPR. I know it's not the most exciting subject for a lot of people. But what the position we found ourselves in, having to get something deployed in less than 2 weeks that was production ready, which involved some audit requirements. It involved some request management around things like right to be forgotten, right to access requests, and suppression requests as well. So we were faced with having to build something from scratch in a very short time scale. So that was kind of our first opportunity to like properly look at serverless and say, is this something that we can go for or not? We'd done some stuff as kind of proof of concepts before that, so we kind of knew what we'd need to do to get something up and running. But what was really apparent at the time was just to get this request capture system up. So it was an API on the back end with API gateway, lambdas, and MongoDB via MongoDB Atlas. And a front end that was hosted in S3 to manage kind of where users can go and create those requests. We had something up and running within a week to start with, which was quite incredible in some ways. I mean, that it was really simple, but it did the job, and there was a lot of work we had to do from that point. And I think what that showed us as a team was that it's a very good choice for trying something really quickly and seeing if it works, and you get a lot of architectural decisions made for you along with that. So that was kind of our foot in the door with serverless, and being able to deliver that application in that timescale meant that, you know, we brought capability that we needed to fulfill some of those GDPR compliancy things coming along. Since that point, we've got a number of other types of UIs that help configure backend systems or set up experiments for certain parts of the things that we're building. We tend to be serverless first when we go into those now, so we don't worry so much about building fully formed APIs using something like ASP.NET Core or something like that. We tend to build the functions, define the API gateways in something like the serverless framework, and have something up and running relatively quickly. I think one thing for us is that, you know, we are a .NET shop, and I think one thing that has become apparent over the last, certainly the last year or so, is
Hi, John.
Hello. Internet issues.
Yeah, no worries. No problem. Yeah, I guess that's the thing we face at the moment when we're doing the virtual stuff, isn't it? So, no, fair enough. Well, I guess we last had you at delving into the you mentioned you guys .NET shop, and then I sort of lost you from that point.
Okay, I think the next thing I just touched on, just talking about what other teams in AO have used serverless. I think just in general, it's becoming a good choice for a lot of teams to get something up and running and trying stuff quite quickly, and becoming a mainstay of some of our architectural choices. And it's in use across like loads of teams. We've got over 20 tech teams here at AO, and they're using it from things like on-site content delivery, I can't say the word now, regulatory reporting, and even some of our chatbot developments as well, which is really exciting.
Oh, great. I guess one of the big question I wanted to ask as well, how does serverless impact DevOps, that sort of DevOps culture?
Yeah, it's another good question. I'm a massive advocate of DevOps and what DevOps means. And I like to always kind of bring my thinking of DevOps back to the three ways that Gene Kim spoke about in the Phoenix project and subsequently the DevOps handbook. And I think if we just talk about those three ways very quickly, we can move into how I think serverless plays a big part in that DevOps mindset and culture that we can bring to what we're working. So the first way is the way of flow, effectively how we can move things from left to right or from idea to production as quickly as possible. And we've already spoke about it a little bit. The GDPR use case was a classic example of us going from, we need to get this done, to it being up and running in production in quite a short time scale. And I think serverless, when applied to the first way, it means that we're writing as little code as possible. Actually, we're writing the code that actually makes a difference, the stuff that is solving a big business problem. We're embracing infrastructure as code, so things are repeatable and a bit safer. Enabling systems thinking as well, just kind of elevating our thinking a little bit. And bringing things like reliability experience to the team as part of that as well. So we're delivering safely as well. So that's, you know, there's a lot of kind of benefits that we get from serverless within the way of flow. The way of feedback is a little bit different. I guess I didn't touch on this in some of the challenges of serverless, but the way of feedback is about creating and amplifying fast and continuous feedback. And I think the biggest thing here where serverless kind of needs to not necessarily get better, but it's more of a mindset shift for the engineers and the people building serverless types of architectures, is around instrumenting your code for observability. So you creating those feedback loops that are a little harder to get if you're operating in this way, because you've abstracted yourself so far away from the infrastructure, and that's kind of all done for you. And what you actually care about is instrumenting your code so that you can see if it's solving the problem that you're actually trying to solve or not, and making that visible and making the metrics visible alongside it. And then finally, the way of learning. And again, this is all about creating opportunities for learning quickly, frequently, cheaply, and as soon as possible. And again, what we're talking about here is that speed aspect to a certain degree, and being able to try things quickly and see if it's doing what we expect it to do. And again, we've spoke about how quickly you can get up and running with something by choosing serverless technologies and embracing things like scientific thinking to help with that is massively important. And I think thinking of serverless through those three ways and the behaviors that we expect to see from a team who use serverless means that, you know, if we describe a DevOps team, there are certain behaviors that you define that team alongside with. And I think there's also a definition of what we could say a serverless DevOps team is and what they're doing. And you could define it as, you know, a team that builds systems writing as little code as possible, responsible for the health of their services and systems as a whole, and creating their own deployment and management tooling. It's a team that instruments their code for observability and ensuring that system and business metrics are visible. And it's a team that deploys quickly to provide new learning opportunities for themselves and the organization, and designing architectures that are resilient to failure.
Nice. Some really good points there, and to I guess the big topic and how that would affect DevOps. And good that reference quite a lot with the Jeannie Kim side as well, as he delves quite a lot into that in the Phoenix project. So good. Well, yeah, I've covered quite a lot, I guess, into the introduction of serverless, and just recapping in terms of what is serverless and the benefits and disadvantages as well. It seems to me that from obviously what you've mentioned, it's somewhere, where if you do want to try something quickly and getting it done right, it's definitely the best thing to do, that best way to go down. So yeah, that's pretty much everything from my side. So yeah, good to have you on today, John, and from the first installment of our sort of serverless as well, and hopefully we can try and get you on the webinar towards the end as well. We'll get a couple of panelists, to discuss different areas across from their side. So yeah, no, thanks for your time today, John.
Perfect. Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, I'll speak to you soon anyway.
Great stuff.
See you later. Bye.